Right, I'm Stuart Parkinson. I work for Scientists for Global Responsibility, and we're an organisation of scientists and engineers and others concerned about the misuse of science and technology. And there's a few leaflets and newsletters at the back, a few here as well, if you want to know more about us. And I'm going to talk about a particular area that we do most of our work in, or a majority of our work in, is around peace issues and the relationship between militarism and technology and science as well. And so I'm going to talk a bit about, firstly, about some of the historical links between science, technology and the military, and then talk more broadly about some of the key technological sort of interlinks which I think are in common with other areas of science and technology and other issues like environmentalism and so on. So I guess the place to start is that the military is one of the oldest influences, one of the oldest political elites, really, shaping and controlling technology and the way it's developed, and you can see examples throughout history. Where it kind of really gets going, though, of course, is in the Industrial Revolution, and we see that particularly taking hold around the mid-1800s, and the military was very quick to get involved in seeing the potential within the Industrial Revolution, get involved in industries that help develop weapons and other military technologies, and you start to see that in the first industrial wars. And so an example is the Crimean War in the 1850s, where the Russians fought the French, the British and the Turks, and we see parallels today. So in around the 1850s they started being able to use mass-produced rifles, mass-produced army kit in general. Then in the 1860s, in the American Civil War, you see this trend repeated, steel starting to be used in warships, new explosives being developed. So after 500 years of gunpowder being the dominant explosive, you see the rise of dynamite towards the end of the 19th century. And so the military quickly colonized scientific research and development around these areas, funded it, expanded it, and in this ever-growing pursuit of trying to get a quick win on a battlefield. I think one of the most illustrative statistics around this is the exponential rise of destructive capability of weapons during the 20th century. And helpfully, the military came up with a measure of this called the Theoretical Lethality Index, which is a standardized measure of how many people you can kill in an hour with a particular weapon, and it's sort of standardized across different weapons. It's wonderful. They love this. But according to this measure, over the 20th century, the destructive capability of weapons grew 50 million times just over the course of the century. And you can see that you were starting off with rifles around the early 20th century, and how quickly that grew, and you've got thermonuclear weapons at the end of that, and so you can quite easily see how the destructive potential grew. And of course all these factors were key within the later colonial wars and being able to dominate larger areas of the globe, and then when the imperial powers clashed in World War I and onto World War II, and the proxy wars that were fought during the Cold War, and of course the ever-present threat of nuclear annihilation. And you see the issues reflected in huge casualty figures and the enormous percentage of civilian casualties within war, and how that's grown, and it's around 80-90% of the casualties in war are civilian. And then in the last decade or two, you've seen sort of rises in other forms of concern. So concern about casualty levels, and there is a bit of this within the military, it has led to a move towards what they call precision weapons. But of course, being able to use weapons more accurately means that there's a potential to use them in areas that you wouldn't use weapons in, so built-up areas. So you see, one of the interesting statistics from a piece of research done on the Iraq War was that the number of civilian casualties from an airstrike was similar to the number of civilian casualties from a suicide bomb. You've got the really basic technology, but you've got the high-tech technology that's still just killing just as many people. And then you've got various other areas, the sort of rise of what they call non-lethal weapons, but of course they're not non-lethal, they still kill some people. Surveillance technologies and the rise of autonomous weapons is what's on the way. But we shouldn't forget that the biggest killers are still small arms, artillery shells, and the biggest threat is still the nuclear weapons, the thermonuclear weapons in particular. And so to try and draw out of some of the key overlaps and threads with other areas, I've come up with sort of 6 areas where I think that there's overlap. So the first one is the domination of the idea of technofix. So in this area, it's high-tech weapons bringing security, and it's regarded as the main way of creating security in the world. We use high-tech and the weapon systems, and that's how we create security. It's not about building trust or negotiation or all the other alternative non-violent ways. Another aspect is the rise of an elite within society that has particular influence and control and draws its control from the technology. And you've probably all heard of the term military-industrial complex, term that was coined actually by a right-wing ex-military American president, and even President Eisenhower in 1961 came up with this term, and even he recognised the power of military industry working with politicians, being able to sort of exert a huge amount of power to maintain resources and funding and skills going into weapons development. Another issue, as I mentioned, is huge rise in the destructive capability of the technology. The fourth concern is a bit more subtle, but it's just as serious, is the capture of research and development. And the military was an early funder of scientific research, publicly funded scientific research. As well, and it grew particularly powerful during the World Wars, the early years of the Cold War in particular, and it exerted a particular mindset. There was a reduction in openness and research, which is anti the whole concept of science being an open and public sort of process, and also creating a mindset where there's greater and greater specialism and asking awkward questions beyond the narrow specialism, asking awkward questions about sort of wider political issues that affect your work is not really encouraged within science and technology. The fifth concern is around what's called spin-off technologies and spin-off benefits. And the idea, particularly in the military area, is that you fund research and development in the military area, and then you get spin-off benefits in other areas, and therefore it's really okay to fund military R&D, because okay, you get the weapons, and well, we have to have a few of those, but you get all these other civilian benefits, and that's sort of grown to a mythical concept. And of course, if you want to get better understanding of problems in health, you fund health research. You don't fund military research and hope that you get a few side benefits. So, and the final sort of cross-cutting issue is the idea of technological lock-in, so that you create manufacturing processes and the infrastructures to support those processes, and the social and political and economic structure to support those processes, that locks you into a particular technological path, and there are numerous examples of this throughout history. I'll give you just one. In the rise of the jet engine during the Second World War and its development, it was used in civilian area and led to the takeoff, quite literally, of the civilian air industry, and that becoming a quite dominant form of travel, rather than technological alternatives like airships. They're slower, but they're a lot less polluting, or more ground-based travel like trains, and you have the whole imbalance in the way taxation of transport fuel is used, so aviation is exempt from a tax system. And also, of course, it works against more locally based societies and economies. So it works at so many different technological and social levels. And so those are the sort of cross-cutting issues that I wanted to point out. Thank you.